Welcome, everyone. I'm Lynn Barrett, President of the Board of Vermont Independent Media, Publishers of the Commons. This is our last Voices Live event for this year, but we'll be back again next year with more compelling events of interest to the community. We're delighted tonight to have Secretary of State Sarah Copeland Hanzas with us, as well as 4 of our local town clerks. These are the ones on the front lines. Tonight is an opportunity to get your questions answered about the election and learn about the efforts Vermont is making to ensure a fair, secure, and peaceful election. We want to thank our sponsors, Brattleboro Savings and Loan and Park Place and M&T Bank. Without them, we wouldn't be here tonight. And before I introduce our moderator, please note to please put your questions in the chat and we'll be sure to get to them. Now, let me introduce our moderator, Tim Johnson, and we'll get started. Many of you know Tim. He's a veteran broadcaster and member of the Vermont Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame. He works part-time for 96 TSA FM and 99.5 The Beast in Brattleboro. He is also town clerk of Vernon. And now, Tim will introduce our panel members. Take it away, Tim.
Well, thank you, Lynn. It's a pleasure to be involved with this event that is being put together by Vermont Independent Media and also on VCTV. This is a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts. And the discussion tonight will focus on what you need to know about Vermont's election system. How do we know that our elections are secure with rampant fears of AI, mis- and disinformation, in some cases outright lies, deepfakes, and bad actors? We'll try to answer all of your questions, or at least the questions that we can, and I would encourage you to contact any town clerk with your questions if you don't get them tonight. We're delighted tonight to have Vermont Secretary of State Sarah Copeland Hanzas as part of our discussion. Sarah, as some of you may know, is committed to safeguarding and strengthening democracy in our state. She was elected in 2022, and she has prioritized election integrity, transparency in government, and expanding civic engagement to make sure that all Vermonters can fully participate in their democracy. She's a former high school teacher and a small business owner. Also joining us are 4 local town clerks here in southern Vermont. Of course, the town clerks are responsible for election administration. They are Andy McLean, the town clerk of Dover, first elected Dover town clerk in 2007. And I reminded him before our event that, gosh, he may be from Massachusetts, but Vermont is a state of mind, and we're glad to have him nonetheless. He says serving his friends and neighbors continues to be the honor of his life. Carol Hessebeck is the town clerk of Newfane. Carol has been town clerk in Newfane for 7.5 years, and we congratulate you on your efforts. Forrest Holzappel is the town clerk of Marlborough. He has been Marlborough town clerk since 2013 and a lister for the town of Marlborough since 2002. Marlborough is his hometown. He grew up in the house of a former town clerk. And we have Lori Fischette, the town clerk of Dummerston. She's been the Dummerston town clerk since 2016, and she began her career with the town of Dummerston in 2005, first as an assistant town clerk, then as a select board assistant and town treasurer, adding to her hat of many colors. So if any of our panelists would like to ask a question or elaborate on something, please raise your hand at any time, and they can also ask questions of each other and of our distinguished guest, Sarah Copeland Hanzas. Sarah, we can't thank you enough for joining us, and frankly, many of us who have worked with you for the past 2 years are very excited to have you here tonight. First thing, what is the most important thing that we need to know about this year's election and Vermont's election system?
It is an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be on a panel with a group of town clerks from across your region who have been doing this work of elections administration for many years. We are in the run-up to the 2024 general election. It's just 6 days away, and it's an exciting time to be working in the elections realm. What is the most important thing that you need to know in the run-up to this election? I think the most important thing to know is that your elections are in good hands. These men and women who are panelists with me here tonight are duly sworn by their own communities to follow the procedures that are laid out for free, fair, safe, and accessible elections. And in Vermont, it's very important to us that we balance all of those: free, fair, safe, and accessible. I think, we'll jump right into some really good questions, but I think the only other thing that I'd like to say to folks is we are now at the time where you need to make a plan to vote. If you have your ballot that was mailed to you, you should make a plan for getting it back to your polling place. If you plan to vote in person, BYOB, bring your own ballot, because the state has mailed you a ballot. If you don't take it with you on election day, then your clerk or the polling place administrator will ask you to sign a form just guaranteeing that you didn't vote the ballot that was mailed to you. So now is the time where you need to make a plan to vote.
This has been called one of the most contentious years and most important elections that we've seen in recent years. Hard to believe that this one could be more contentious than the last couple, but it's one that unfortunately we're hearing daily, almost hourly, about malicious efforts to take advantage of voters, either with misleading or fake information or with direct scams. How are you and your state elections division addressing all this and equipping the local election administrators with the tools they need to combat it?
That is a great question. So we have known for, several months that there will be bad actors. And in fact, the most recent reports that are coming to us from our federal law enforcement partners are that indeed foreign actors are spreading mis and disinformation. That mis and disinformation is intended to divide Americans, to have us believing that there are deep divides and deep differences between one person and another. And I know from being, here in rural Orange County, that there's more that unites me with my neighbors than that divides me. And so these foreign actors are using social media, using AI, manipulating those algorithms to convince us that we should mistrust our neighbors, and they are looking to have an advantage because they are going to capitalize on this division. So we have created a number of resources that are available on the Secretary of State's website. And I hope that you will check out our page on AI and deepfakes. It has a lot of helpful information to help folks understand if what they're hearing in an audio message or a phone call is real. It will help you discern some of the cues that you might get if the video that you're seeing on social media or online are AI deepfakes. And I would ask folks to always, if something that you're hearing doesn't sound quite right, trust your gut and look for a trusted source of information. So also available on our website is a page around election security and myth versus fact. And so we have done our best to try to create all of these resources for voters to be able to have access to the correct information, to the truth about how we administer elections. Now, the truth about how we administer our elections and the real superpower in our democracy here in Vermont is all of the town and city clerks who are working every day to make sure that our elections are well run. And so our office has also been providing our town and city clerks with lots of information that they can also push out through their channels. Maybe you have a front porch forum, maybe you have a social media account for your town, maybe you have a town website, and we've seen a lot of clerks across the state using those resources and providing them for voters in their community who are turning to them for the information about how to vote.
Very good. Now, at this point, 6 days away from the vote, are you aware of anything that's actually out there that is threatening our voting integrity, either our safety or our systems that are set up to allow people to vote and have the vote counted accurately?
So we have been working since the beginning of this year to prepare for this moment and to prepare for these final days and the tallying of the votes that happens at 7 p.m. next Tuesday. We are aware of an array of different, possibilities of things that could happen. It's Vermont, we could get a massive snowstorm, we could have a power outage, we could have an internet outage. We are preparing for all of those contingencies. And we are also actively supporting our town and city clerks across the state. Whenever one of those clerks sees something that looks a little bit odd or doesn't seem right, they're elevating that to our office. And in the event that we see something that looks like it could be voter fraud, we are elevating that, investigating that, sending that off to the Attorney General's office for further scrutiny. And so knocking on wood, I feel like we're in a good place with the 247 duly sworn town and city clerks on the job, and our office here offering every support we can offer.
What would you say could be done among local towns and cities across Vermont to improve voter confidence in the process? And what level would you say voter confidence is right now?
I think voter confidence is sort of a patchwork, right? We've got some folks who are spending way too much time on one of these devices and probably scrolling through whatever the algorithm wants them to see. And remember, there are foreign actors who are trying to influence that algorithm to make sure that you feel divided and disenfranchised. What can voters do? What I think folks can do is reach out to your neighbors, talk to somebody who is a Board of Civil Authority member, talk to a JP in your community, call your own town clerk or stop down and say hello. While you're there, please say thank you. Take them a box of chocolates, maybe a bottle of wine if you happen to know that they like it. They're working very hard for you right now. But for folks who don't understand what election administration looks like, you really have to see it in order to understand all of the checks and balances and the redundancies that are in place where there are multiple sets of eyes on every step in the process. And we have, IT systems that are helping us to track who has voted and who has moved from one community to another. And so if you have concerns and if you have questions, these are all public processes, as long as you're not disrupting the job that your clerk and your BCA needs to do at any given moment. You can be there to observe. And if you wonder about election and how they're run, I would welcome you to do that.
All right. And along with that, what is the state doing to help keep voters informed about the voting process and how things are coming as we move closer to that day?
Yeah, so we have been pushing information out at every turn. We've had a series of Front Porch Forum posts that have gone out statewide. We're getting good uptake on those. We see people responding and saying, thank you for that information. We are pushing out information through our TV and radio and print media. to make sure that voters understand how to cast their ballot and what they need to know. And, at the end of the day, it's sort of an all hands on deck kind of scenario where we are pushing this information out. We're also providing it to all of the town and city clerks who can also amplify it within their own communities. And I know it's not enough because we still hear people who, who maybe got down a deep rabbit hole about how elections are run in a different part of the country and come to their clerk with demands and questions about why something isn't done this way in Vermont. Every one of the 50 states has a different set of rules about how we govern elections. And I feel very confident that the town and city clerks in Vermont are well-trained, well-prepared, and are following the law as it stands in Vermont.
We switched to mail-in ballots to all active voters in the state in 2020 during the November election because of COVID-19. The pandemic was still underway. And then the next year, as I remember, the Vermont legislature, which in this area was pushed by former state Senator Jeanette White when she was the chair of the Senate Government Operations Committee, thought it would be a good idea to continue that process for all November elections. Has that process affected us both positively and negatively, and how?
So I think that, that availability of your ballot coming to your home weeks ahead of when it's due has really been a benefit to voters who are so busy. Maybe you're working a job, maybe you're working two jobs. You've probably got, kids at home. You've got duties that you need to fulfill. It has been challenging in recent years for people to know who's on their ballot and to stay on top of, who, which candidate is offering something that you support versus candidates who you wouldn't want to vote for. Over the years, before I became secretary, I spent 18 years in the Vermont House. And I would always ask people when I talked to them, when I was campaigning door to door, I would always ask people, are you going to vote? How are you feeling about the upcoming election? Is there anything that you need? And so many times people would say to me, I need this, this, and this, but I don't want to vote because I don't know who those people are. Right? I don't know who those people are on my ballot, and I don't know what all of those positions are. And that's why when we moved to universal vote by mail, it was important to me that our office start to fill that gap, right? Many of our local newspapers in the last decade have ceased operation, and it's harder and harder to find out who's on your ballot. And so it was important to me to make sure that we do a universal voter guide. And we have for this general election, every single candidate who's on your ballot, from presidential candidates all the way down through your House and Senate candidates from Vermont, were offered an opportunity to submit a candidate profile, their web address, their contact information, and their social media handles, so that you can use the 30 days or so that you have your ballot before the election to figure out which of those candidates values most closely match your own. And we've had really good response to that voter guide. I know that a lot of people have used it and have found the candidate who they thought would be the best for the job. You can also find descriptions of what the job is, because honestly, if you don't know what a high bailiff is, how do you know who's going to be the best high bailiff candidate in your county? And so, all of these resources we're trying to push out because it feels really important to me that that the absence of information not be a detriment to people in being able to participate in our democracy.
And as well, has there been a gap in knowledge regarding the change over to mailing ballots in the November elections. I think there have been some people who have not been aware until it shows up and they say, here's a ballot. I don't know where it's from.
Right, right. Yeah, what I've noticed as I've been watching this closely in recent years, and before I became Secretary of State, I was the chair of the House Government Operations Committee, which oversees elections. So I was in office in 2020 when the pandemic hit, and we needed to figure out how to make sure that Vermonters could participate in their democracy without sacrificing their own health during a global pandemic. And it is a challenge for folks to remember from one election to the next. How is it that we vote, right? In March, some communities vote from the floor at a traditional town meeting. Some communities do everything by Australian ballot. So you show up and you cast a ballot on Tuesday. And then other communities do a sort of a combination of both of those, where some items are voted by ballot and some items are voted on the floor during town meeting. For our August primary, you need to request a ballot. It does not get automatically mailed to you. Part of the reason for that is that the postage for sending out 3 different parties' ballots to every single Vermonter, when every single Vermonter can only vote in one party primary, it just didn't seem like a good use of resources. And then we get to the general election where it's automatically mailed. And so, yeah, a lot of people forget that in March we do it one way, in August we do it another way, and in November it comes to you automatically.
How do you protect the integrity of these mail-in votes, particularly when a number of residents of our communities don't tell us that they've moved, and all of a sudden these ballots show up and the resident is no longer there?
Yes, and what I have been saying as often as I can since the ballots went out in late September is, if you get a ballot to your home for somebody who does not live there anymore, please return that ballot unopened to your town or city clerk, because that's going to be the best way to figure out where that, whether that person needs to be removed from the checklist, or maybe they just moved across town and you didn't know that, and the clerk didn't know that. There are a number of systems that we have in place that help us to update our voter rolls periodically over the course of the year. This year was a particularly challenging year to do that work. And that work that is done on the local level by your local board of civil authority, led by your town or city clerk. And you cannot, by federal law, you cannot do that active work of challenging voters within 90 days of an election. And so we had an election in March. Many school budgets failed and had to be revoted one or more times. And then we had an election in August, and now we're approaching November. And so those windows of time when the clerks might have been able to say, oh, I think that the Miller family moved. Let's see if we can get them a challenge letter and get them off the voter rolls because I think they've moved. The windows of time to do that this year were extremely tight. And so after the dust settles and everybody has, slept for a week after the November election, we will jump right in and bear down on helping to support our town and city clerks in updating those voter rolls so that Vermonters who have moved can get their voter registration updated.
How do you keep people from filling out ballots for those who have passed on? And what does the law say for someone who may have filled out a ballot and then passes on before the election?
So we hear occasionally of situations like this, and I think it's important to understand that if you are mailed a ballot and you fill out your ballot and tomorrow you get hit by a bus, Your ballot that has already been sent in is in your clerk's hands. If you pass away and days later, one of your family members fills out your ballot and dates that ballot envelope after you've passed away, my guess is that your clerk is going to figure that out. And that is a crime. And I do not wish that on you because I have seen instances where clerks have said, I don't know how Mr. Jones could have voted because he passed away on this date and the ballot envelope says this, and that will mean an investigation ensues. And, you know, I'm not the expert on some of these details. I would love to hear from some of our town clerks who are on the call if they have thoughts, observations, or situations like this that they've seen. But we really rely on them to be the caretakers of their own local checklist and to alert us if something looks odd in one of those scenarios.
While the federal elections are not affected by this, there are a number of communities that allow people who are not U.S. citizens but are legal residents of their communities to vote. And in Brattleboro, 16 and 17-year-olds, while they are not allowed to vote in a presidential election or a general election like this, they can vote in local elections. Is that helpful to the process or not?
So we gave that a lot of consideration in the legislature when those charter changes came before us. So there was a charter change from Brattleboro that said we support our 16 and 17-year-olds being able to participate in our local democracy. We also had charter changes from Montpelier, Burlington, and Winooski saying we want all residents of Burlington, Montpelier, and Winooski to be able to vote in our local elections. And so we gave that a lot of consideration because it was very important to make sure that we don't inadvertently put somebody who is not a citizen on the statewide voter checklist. If you vote in an election as a non-citizen, that is a crime, and it will probably preclude you from ever being able to gain United States citizenship, right? So we wanted to make sure there were many protections in place to make sure that people who are not yet citizens cannot vote in our state or federal elections, but that they can safely vote in their local elections, and the same with 16 and 17-year-olds. And so the way that works in communities is that the clerk takes on the extra duty of keeping two checklists. One checklist is your local checklist for those local issues that maybe your 16 and 17-year-olds can vote on, maybe all residents can vote on. And the other checklist, which is facilitated by the state and at the Secretary of State's office through our election management system, is for state and federal elections. And on that list, we don't have 16 and 17-year-olds as eligible voters, and we don't have non-citizens as eligible voters on our statewide checklist. And so it means extra work for those local communities, but I don't think that it means a risk that someone who's not eligible to vote would be offered a ballot.
A couple of other questions before we get to members of our panel. Firstly, how exactly are these mail-in ballots counted and when?
Oh, well, you know, we went back and forth about that during 2021 after the emergency universal vote by mail that we did during the pandemic. We came back to the legislature and said, you know, this amounted to record participation on the part of Vermonters. We really like the fact that every Vermonter was offered the opportunity to vote and they didn't have to figure out how to take time off of work in order to get to the polls on election day. But, you know, when we at the end of the day, when we figure out, you know, how is this working and how can we make sure that it works going forward, we had to really listen to the clerks, listen to voters, listen to the elections division at the Secretary of State's office to say, how is this all going to fit together? And what we realized is, being able to put the ballots that come in the mail into your tabulator in the days leading up to election night is an important way for clerks to minimize the stress and strain that happens on election night. And, if you save all of your ballots for the entirety of the election and you have to process them all after 7 p.m., you're going to end up being there for hours and hours. And so because our tabulators are secured and locked and cannot be tampered with, we have encouraged, and in fact, the law allows for town and city clerks to begin to feed in those ballots that come in by mail in batches as they come in. And then after 7 p.m. on election night, after every ballot that has been legally cast is in the machine, then and only then the clerk can ask for a readout of those ballots and of those tallies and from the tabulator. And I think it has really helped the boards of civil authority to be able to balance that workload so that it's not all starting at 7 p.m. and concluding at midnight. They can do it sometimes in the daytime. And I would welcome Andy or Lori or Forrest to jump in. Carol, jump in if you have observations of how you have done early ballot processing in your communities. Because I think it's been really important to being able to balance that workload.
I'm going to call on Andy, but I just want to say that in my particular case in Vernon, we are doing the early ballots the afternoon before Tuesday's actual vote. We have a place where the public can observe right in the front part of the town clerk's office. We have an observation window that people can watch, and we still have a modicum of security because people cannot get in and disturb the counters while they are running ballots into the tabulator. And I would really like to hear from some of the other communities. Andy, what about Dover?
Yeah, so I think Sarah described that well. And all I can add is that, while, being at the polling place till late in the night is not pleasant, really the issue winds up being in small communities, your town clerk might get to the office at 6 a.m. to pick up the tabulator, has a hectic day on an election like this. Some elections less so, but on an election like this, it's a stressful day. Polls close at 7, and at that point, you're supposed to do your best work. You're supposed to get it right. You're not supposed to make mistakes. And, I was elected in 2007. We had a record turnout for the presidential in 2008. We had no tabulator in Dover at that point. And myself and one other election official did our election night reporting and left the polling place as the sun was coming up the next morning. We'll do it, but it's not going to be the election that people deserve. They deserve an election where the officials who are in charge of ensuring things are correct are on top of their game. It's not after 13 hours of stress and the numbers are swimming together like this. I just wanted to add that. It's, I'll stay there all night if you want me to, but more importantly, you want the results to be correct. We'll be counting ballots ahead of the election, running them through the machine Thursday at 1 p.m. in Dover at the town office, and it's open to the public. Come on down.
And Andy, I think that you brought up an important point that most people who haven't been right in the middle of elections don't think about, is on any given election, you're going to have some of those ballots that just go through the machine, and that's super nice and easy and great. But every election is going to have some number of people who made a write-in choice, right? And when those write ballots get separated from the ballots that didn't have a write-in, that's when all of the men and women who are volunteering to do that work in the evening have to stop and say, you know, okay, is this a ballot for Tim Johnson? Is this a ballot for, you know, someone else? You know, what does that handwriting say? And we want, you know, we want that process to be as smooth as possible.
That's right, Sarah. Yes, they're looking for all the write-ins. You need to get that correct. They're looking for voter intent as well. You don't wind up with a lot of those, but you want everybody's vote to be as important to the counters as it was to the person casting the vote. You know, you don't want to. You owe it to the people to be right, be correct about their ballot. You know, even if they didn't do a great job filling it out.
It didn't stay in that circle.
Yeah, not all of them do.
It happens.
And I will add that the tabulators are subject to an accuracy check at least 10 days before the election, so we can guarantee that the machines will work properly. And in my case, I actually had a repairman come in and work on the machine as part of that process. So we know that it's working correctly. Forrest, I'm going to call on you next.
Thanks. In Marlboro, we count by hand. We have only 700 voters. And so we are, you know, have plenty of practice doing this. And it's an interesting thing. I always listen with great interest with folks and their stories of the tabulators, and I have no fear about going there eventually. But honestly, we count by hand, and there's something very beautiful about it because you know, our Board of Civil Authority will have about 9 pairs, so 18 people counting. We'll have probably 600 votes, and we'll crank through it in a couple hours. And the biggest thing is for myself and the assistant town clerk is getting all of the tally sheets into the summary sheet, which then gets fed to the state, and that's really our biggest bottleneck. But just as Andy was saying, I mean, we stay until it's done, and I've not been there later than midnight before, so it's not terrible, but it's a.
Okay, I'm going to see if Lori or Carol have anything to add, but I will say that a portion of Vermont Title 17, which is the state statute that governs election law in the state, says that in the case of any state or federal election, any town with more than 1,000 voters on their voter list has to count by use of the tabulator. You cannot choose to say, well, we're going to count by hand. That's not the way it works. The tabulator has been supplied to your town. You need to make sure that it's running correctly and that you're able to use it and to its full potential. Make sure that the count is accurate. And there you are. Carol, Lori, anything?
We count during the day oops, hold on just one second. In Dummerston, we count during election day. We open the absentee ballots and run them through the machine. We have 2 teams that open the envelopes, sort them, and then one person feeds them through the tabulator. And that works very well for us.
In Newfane, the Board of Civil Authority had a meeting in September and decided that we would take 3 Thursdays, a couple of hours each of those Thursdays in October, and they would come in and process the absentee ballots that we had received to that point. So we did that the last 2 Thursdays. I have Board of Civil Authority members coming in tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to process ballots. There will still be ballots to do for us to do on election day, but we'll find slow times during the day and we'll process them then. It's helpful to not have to do all of the ballots on election day, but
And just to remind our viewers, the Board of Civil Authority is members of the Board of Selectmen or select people in a town, plus the justices of the peace. So normally you have a very good makeup of different political parties who are involved in the process. And I believe there was a change within the last couple of years that says if there are not members of a political party on that Board of Civil Authority, they can be added for the purpose of elections.
yep, we have that in Newfane. 2 years ago, we didn't have any Republicans vote justices of the peace candidates voted in. So 3 of them petitioned the select board to add them to the Board of Civil Authority because that's the number you're allowed to have. And they did. And so I have a 10-member justice of the peace sort of thing, because instead of the 7 justices of the peace, but just for elections. And it works very well because you really need the mix. There are things that say send 2 justices of the peace, but you don't have 2 different parties. It makes it hard. So.
Yeah. Tim, there's one other thing that I wanted to add, because you talked about the accuracy of our tabulators, and I think it's important for folks on this call to know that the state of Vermont double checks that. So in December, open to the public, you're welcome to join us. It'll be at the State House. We will select a number of towns, and we will have their ballots brought securely to the State House. We will verify that the ballot bag has not been touched since the clerk of that community last put a seal on it. We will take the ballots out, we will feed them through an optical scanner, and we will look to see if the optical scanner has the same results that we saw on election night, or that were reported on election night and certified the following week. And, in the history of optical scanners in Vermont, we have found that those are by and large very, very accurate. And the times that we see differences in totals happen to be around those times that I think Andy was talking about earlier, where it's difficult to tell the voter's intent. Maybe they didn't fill out the circle perfectly, or their marking crossed over into another circle. And so in those instances, it is the Board of Civil Authority sitting there with one person from one party and one person from another on election night, looking to say, I think this voter's intent was to vote for candidate A. And so we double check that in our audit after the election, and welcome folks if they are interested in sitting through a long, boring day, because it's probably 6 or 7 hours of watching this process. But you can come and watch and see how the audit compares to the results that were certified.
Thank you. I want to hear from our panel of town clerks to find out how this year's election has been for them. Has there been any differences in the way things have gone, and why? Andy?
One thing I'm curious about, the election has gone smoothly in Dover, as expected. No issues. I can't point to anything interesting for you, Tim. But one thing I am interested in is the fact that in Dover, we're seeing a lower return rate on our absentee ballots than we did in 2020. And my guess is it's the pandemic. Not only did you have folks who wanted to vote absentee or early, but you had folks who just didn't want to show up to the polling place for fear of catching COVID, And so I'm wondering on election day if I'm wondering about the vote totals, if it will be down from 2020 or if folks are just waiting to show up to the polls and get back to that experience after the COVID pandemic. Otherwise, all good in Dover.
Carol, Lori?
In Dummerston, everything is going smoothly. We did have some concerned voters at the beginning because our ballots were in the last batch to be mailed out on October 1st. So we had some impatient people, but so far, so good.
Yeah, everything's going fine in Newfane. Haven't really had any issues. Had some people come in to register to vote who have lived in the town for years and never bothered, but are really interested in voting this year. So they've come in and registered to vote. And that's great. Everybody should vote at every election.
Forrest, what about you?
Yeah, it's been interesting for us. I mean, it's been very smooth so far and really no problems. In Marlboro, let's see, in 2021 and then again, in 2022 and again in 23, the voters have chosen, we voted on this twice. It was about 300 to 100 to do all of our elections by Australian ballot, and the select board mails ballots to all the voters. So we're feeling in this moment like many people understand how this works and how it goes. So that's been smooth. That the town clerk, the town meeting whole issue is not really appropriate for right now, but anyway, we're finding that continuity seems to be working fairly well for people. And I mean, Andy, I agree. It's down a little bit from 2022 and 2020, but it's also, yeah, we'll see what happens on election.
We'll see. In Berlin, we've had maybe a few comments, I think mainly from a lack of understanding. Again, you put the mail-in ballots 2 years apart and people forget it's happening, and you need to remind them. It's almost a daily campaign beginning in June or July that these things are coming. So greater understanding really is a need. And this year we've had a couple of angry individuals confront me about that and ask if I was part of a big conspiracy, which of course I'm not. So we just need to continue on with the education process. Big question for all of us, I think. Do people ask what happens to their mail-in vote once they hand it over to the clerk or put it in a drop box? Where does it go? Does it get counted? When does it get counted? And can I watch?
Yes, 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 yes. And I'll leave it to those of you who are doing this weekly, daily, to describe a little bit about how that happens.
Let's go to our panel.
Yeah. Go ahead. I've had some people ask, not a whole lot, but just a few wanting to know what the process is. And then they go, oh, good, thank you. I'm going to go tell my neighbors because we were talking about it. So, ask. If you have questions, ask your town clerk.
Lori, Forrest, Andy?
Well, in Dummerston, we open the outside envelope in front of the voter just to make sure that the certificate envelope has been signed so that I don't have to chase them down the driveway afterwards. And we stamp it received in front of them and then explain to them that it will be entered in the computer within half an hour to show that it has been received. And then it goes into our vault until election day when it will be counted.
Yeah, Lori, same in Marlboro, and we found that's very effective too. Actually, like you mentioned, a number of people, again, I'm opening the mailing envelope and making sure their certificate envelope is signed. And the first couple people looked a little bit alarmed, but then I explained to them, like, this is the process so that we know that you've signed this. And once it's good, I've also been directing people to the My Voter page where they can see that's updated fairly soon after we input into the system. They can see.
Oh, Forrest became muted, but that is exactly what I would have said. Go to your My Voter page, so mvp.vermont.gov. You can sign in with your first and last name, the last 4 digits of your social security number or your driver's license number, and you can actually track your ballot, and you can see my ballot was mailed on this date, my ballot was received on this date, and if your ballot was for some reason defective, maybe you forgot to sign that certificate envelope or you forgot to date it, it will be marked defective, and you can go contact your clerk to find out how you can fix that ballot. And, being able to track your ballot, I think, is really important. So you can see that when you put your ballot in the mail, 5 to 10 days later, it's received by your clerk. And again, right now, if you have not returned your ballot yet, it is the time you need to go find your clerk in person or go find your ballot drop box to get that back to your clerk.
Andy?
Yeah, I'm going to more or less repeat what's already been said. That's probably, Tim, the biggest question I've gotten as the election has progressed. Folks vote their ballot and they're naturally curious. They hand their ballot to me or they put it in the drop box, put it in the mail, but particularly when we're face to face and they want to hand it to me, they're not comfortable putting it in the box or in the mail for whatever reason. They want to know what happens to that ballot, where does it go specifically, and what measures am I taking to ensure the integrity of the vote and also the anonymity of the vote. I think that, it's kind of counterintuitive to put your name on the envelope. Your ballot is supposed to be secret. And yet, in order for us to check you off the list, we have to know who's giving us a ballot. And a name has to be tied to that ballot. The name is only tied to the envelope. And I explain the process for opening the envelopes, the number of people required, and the actual physical process so that the person opening the envelope and putting it face down and removing the ballot is not the person unfolding the ballot. I explain that it happens in the presence of multiple election officials who keep an eye on each other. If somebody's trying to spot who voted how, number one, we have too many ballots for that to be an issue. But it's in the presence of other human beings, and we keep an eye on each other, and that's we're proud of the job that we do, and our focus is on folks trusting our process. And so we go out of our way to be diligent about it. And once you explain to people the care that's taken securing their ballot and the care that's taken to ensure the anonymity of their ballot, they feel better. And I always try to come back to the fact that even though I'm dealing with hundreds of ballots, this particular ballot is very important to this voter. It's a big election, and it's their vote, and it needs to be that important to me. But yeah, good question. And it's worth taking some time as a town clerk. And it sounds like we have some good town clerks here too. Thanks, folks.
And in my community, we also have a nursing home and assisted living facility. And I make it my personal mission to go and get votes from people who may be residents and still want to vote. They may be physically impaired, but they still have the same rights as you and I. And I think that's, to a person, town clerks in Vermont would say, we want you to vote. We want you to have the opportunity to vote. We don't care how you vote. Just if you want to vote, we're here for you. We'll go to the ends of the earth to make sure that happens. Now, something that was brought up was whether a family member could use another family member's ballot and vote twice. I don't think that could happen, but Forrest, you had a particular take on this question.
I mean, for me, that's just not really possible. Each human being that's on our checklist can only be checked in by the town clerk one time. Um, if that's something that's happening in a family or friends and they're voting each other's ballots, the ballot, its integrity as a single thing that goes into the box with all the rest of them is not really.
Okay, thank you, Forrest. Now, interesting sidelight with that. In my town, we had a father and a son with the exact same name, but a different initial. And in that case, we had not written down the initial of the younger one of the two. So there was some confusion. And after a few upset moments, we figured that out and made sure that both father and son had the possibility of voting. And one of the things that we do as clerks is to get as much information about our residents as possible. So even something as simple as a middle initial could mean somebody would be getting their right to vote. Or if we eliminated that, it might be an issue. A couple of, what was it again?
So Tim, I think that's a really good point that you bring up, because by and large, the majority of the cases of irregularities that get elevated to our office are situations just like that, where there may be two John Smiths and they're not related, and the poll worker who checked in John P. Smith, made a mistake and actually checked in John D. Smith, and that's where some of those appearances of irregularities happen. And I'm really heartened by the number of times where we have local clerks say, "Hey, something here is not right." And when we investigate it, what we actually find is that it was just that sort of miscommunication, or there wasn't enough information in one of those family members' voter registration listings to be able to tell which of those people with the same name was the one who voted. I feel really proud about our election laws and our procedures and the way they're conducted by our town and city clerks, because as Andy has said a couple of times tonight, this may be a couple 100,000 Vermonters to the Secretary of State's office, or several thousand Vermonters to a town clerk, but we recognize that to you, it is your one vote, right? And we want to make sure that your one vote is able to be cast and that it is accurately counted. And so I'm really proud of the way our laws are arranged to make sure that we are keeping sacred the fact that when you live in a democracy, you are allowed to choose the people who represent you.
So a number of questions still out there, but I think the best one we can ask is, what is the latest I can return my ballot and still have it counted for this election? Sarah?
To the hand of your clerk before 7 p.m. on election day. And so there's some caveats in that, and I hope that these clerks will jump in with any details on their communities. Many communities have their town clerk's office in one location and the polling place on election day in another. So don't go to your town clerk's office on election day if your polling place is across town at the local school. And so you can find all of that information on your My Voter page. Log in, you can find out where your clerk's office is, what your clerk's hours are, and you can also find out where your polling location is. And I encourage folks to make a plan right now. Are you voting on Tuesday, or are you going to get your ballot to your clerk in person? Are you going to use a ballot drop box? Now's the time to make that plan, and you can find all that information on your My Voter page.
Now, there are a number of clerks around Vermont that are closed on the day before an election, but the thing to remember is that those hours are posted on the Secretary of State's website. So if you have a question, you should take a look at your own town website or the Secretary of State's website to find out if there's any change in when your town is having its office hours. Anybody here have a change in the hours they're open the day before the election?
We do in Dummerston. This year, we're going to be closing at noon on Monday. Our polling place is right next door to the town office, so folks can still drop their ballots in the drop box. And I will be picking them up until 7:30 Tuesday morning. And at that point, I'll be putting a sign across the mail slot, directing them to bring their ballots to the polling place.
Perfect.
It's the same thing in Newfane. I'm closing at noon on Monday. They can drop their ballots in the drop box until 7:30 in the morning on election day, but then it's going to be closed and locked because I'm going to be up the street at the fire station. And I don't have the time, unfortunately, to run back to the town office late in the day and check for ballots. If you really get stuck and you can't come up to the fire station, if Melissa, the treasurer, or Juanetta, the town select board's administrative assistant are in the office, they'll bring it up to me for you. But officially, you can't do that.
Same in Dover as what Carol described. We'll be closed on Monday to prepare for the election. The ballot drop box will be open all day. If you really need to see me, call. And I close it when I get to the office to pick up the tabulator about 6 a.m. election morning. I'll put a lock on the drop box and a little sign to bring your ballot to the polling place in Eastover. Yep.
Forrest?
In Marlboro, our polling place is right next to the town office. So we check our P.O. box up until the postmaster leaves. And we have a drop box outside that will check, all the way up to 7 p.m. So yeah, access is pretty good.
And in Gordon, our offices are open until 5 on Monday, and the polling place is just downstairs from the town office. And we will check the drop box periodically. And I know that if I forget it as town clerk, one of the longest serving justices of the peace in our town, who I happen to be married to, will remind me of that. So now, Vermont is also a state that has same-day registration. If I want to register to vote in a town, what should I bring with me on that day?
Well,
Anybody?
I bet some of our clerks have had that happen. So jump right in.
So Tim,
Yep. Go ahead.
go ahead, Lori.
No, that was me. But
It was
that's-
Carol.
Oh, Carol, go ahead, Carol.
We're not allowed to ask for ID if you come in person in front of us. So if you come in front of us and you sign an application to get on the checklist and you're swearing to the information, we take your word for it. You don't need any ID. You need to know your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number, because we have to have one of those. But otherwise, you don't need anything else.
Okay, Lori, Andy?
I agree.
I
I
agree.
agree.
as
And if
well.
you show up to the polling place on election day, please try and bring the ballot you were mailed if you have it.
Now, we in Vermont want every voter to have a positive experience at the polls, but what do you do if there's a question? If you feel something's not happening right, who do you go to?
Town clerk, Tim.
They're coming to you, Tim.
And of course, if your town clerk has an issue, in my case, I have the Secretary of State's office election division on speed dial.
Yes. Yes, and I
Yes.
hope all of you do, and we will be standing at the ready. We always hope for a boring election day, but we are there. We are on the phones. We are waiting for any messages, any questions that clerks need so that we can answer them on election day. And I usually buy the snacks for the team who's actually answering your calls.
I'm curious about one thing. We do have a voter's oath on the application to become a registered voter in Vermont. Has that gone by the wayside, or how important is that in this day and age?
Well, it's in our Vermont Constitution, the requirement to take the voter's oath. And within the last decade or so, we changed that legislatively to say that a voter may self-attest to that oath as opposed to somebody needing to stand in front of them and read the oath and have them repeat the oath, section by section. That allows people to expedite, the taking of the voter's oath and not have to have someone standing in front of them. It would require a constitutional change if we were to eliminate the voter's oath. And for those of you who, like most of us, probably don't remember taking your voter's oath, what you're swearing to in your voter's oath is just that you will cast a ballot of your own values and of your own opinions, and that you will not sell your vote or allow your vote to be swayed by another human being. Your vote is your vote. Your vote is personal and private. You don't have to share it with anyone. If someone asks you how you voted, you are not required to tell them, and you can point to that voter's oath and say, I took an oath saying to the state of Vermont that I will take this vote of my own values and my own accord. And it's been fun to watch people sort of grapple with that voter's oath over the years and say, wow, like I have to actually swear or affirm these things. But it's part of our democracy and it's in our Constitution.
It's funny, I took mine when
Sarah, I would, oops, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, Forrest, that I took mine when I turned 18. Across the glass from where I stand now, 5 town clerks ago in my town. So, Forrest, go ahead.
That's great. I was just going to say, one of the things that I love doing as a town clerk is registering young voters who are just turned 18. But one of the things, Sarah, as you were talking about the voter's oath, I really try to drill this into people when they're registering to vote, is that it's without fear or favor of any person. And that clause and that oath is pretty big, if you think about it. And I think it's particularly germane in this moment with all of what's happening at the national and state level in terms of people mistrusting one another. Like, it's a big deal, in my opinion.
Yes. Yeah, we have all taken that oath that we will cast our ballot without fear or favor. So, Forrest, thank you for bringing that phrase back up for this conversation.
One of the things we do as town clerks in the 30 days preceding an election is to post a list of the registered voters in our town. And I had a gentleman who was a recent transplant from New Hampshire ask about that, because he said, what if someone on the list might be worried about their own safety? What do you do about that? And why do you post the list if you're putting somebody at risk? Now, I believe there's something called the Safe at Home program.
All right, I was going to say, are you sending that question to me, Tim? Because I can certainly answer that. Yeah, there is an address confidentiality program that exists in 30-something states across the country. And it allows people who have who've been stalked or have been victims of domestic violence or human trafficking to keep their physical address private. But it also sets in place some processes to make sure that they can still receive their mail, they can still sign up for government programs, they can still vote but they can do so in a way that doesn't require them to reveal their physical location. And so there is a blind ballot voter. That's the term that's used to refer to somebody who's a part of the Safe at Home program. And those people are individuals. I think there's 200 something of them across the state of Vermont at the current time. That allows those individuals to cast a ballot in their town without appearing with a physical address on the local voter registration rolls.
And conversely, how does one get themselves off a voter checklist?
Well, you call up your town clerk and say, take me off your checklist. And we really wish that people would do that if they're moved to a different place, because it would make the world a lot easier when folks are moving. And Carol was saying no.
Phone call won't work. It has to be in writing.
Okay.
We'll stretch it and take an email, but can't.
How about if they show up in your office?
Yep. They can show up, or they can write us a letter, but something like that.
Sure, because you wouldn't recognize them by the sound of them on the phone. Right. So yeah, that's a good safeguard.
The freedoms that we have, people in other countries who want to vote will stand in line for hours and days to be able to vote. And I wish somebody could tell me why only in sometimes less than 20% of our voters show up for a local election, or even in the statewide election, 60-something% is considered a good day. Why?
Oh, Tim, that's a tragedy, isn't it?
It is.
It is, isn't it? It is. We're blessed here, and we take that for granted sometimes. I think mixed in with perhaps apathy and distraction, which we can take measures to combat those. But I think mixed in with that sometimes is the vote of, hey, you know what? I'm happy with the way things are on the local level. Town meeting, for instance, Forrest said we probably shouldn't get into that tonight, and we probably shouldn't. But I don't think participation is necessarily always the be all and end all in a direct democracy and in small town elections. In an election like this, I don't know, Tim. I don't know what you do. But we're going to have a good turnout. We're going to have a good turnout. Civics classes in school, perhaps?
Maybe. And I know that our Secretary of State has been working on that kind of educational effort, which has been lacking in Vermont in recent years. Sarah?
Yeah, so when I became secretary, we created a new position, Director of Education and Civic Engagement. And this person is helping us to figure out how to provide more civics resources to teachers so that they can teach it in school. We did tabling at fairs and festivals and concerts and ball games across the state this past summer and fall, really engaging with folks, making sure that folks understand how to vote and where to vote and where to get that information. But, I think it's really true that it comes down to making sure that more people have a basic understanding of how our government works. Because if you don't understand how government works, you don't understand how to make government work for you and how to express your ideas and values to your government. And, there are a whole lot of people who benefit when voters remain ignorant. Right? It's the wealthy and well-connected folks who benefit when the electorate, the majority of us, don't know how to participate. And so our office is really focused on making sure that we do everything that we can to provide information to folks and make sure that folks know how to vote, know how to contact their elected officials, know how to participate in a democracy. It's why we did the voter guide. which you can find on your My Voter page, so that you have the contact information and you have the candidate statements and the web addresses for the folks who are on your ballot, and you can reach out to them and talk to them about what's important to you.
It's important to remember that an election is very important, but it's only the start. You meet with your elected officials at community meetings, take a day, walk the halls of the Vermont House, Vermont Senate, go to the State House. It is, as they say, the people's house. It's your house as well, and you should have a chance to go talk with your elected officials. Now, I want to thank all of our guests, Vermont Secretary of State Sarah Copeland Hanzas, Town Clerks Lori Frechette from Dummerston, Carol Hesselbeck from Newfane, Forrest Halasful from Marlborough, and Andy McLean from Dover. And coming up, we have a video that the Secretary of State's office has put together to give you information about the election process. And there are also going to be links on BCTV to give you that information as well. So thank you to everybody. Please vote, and please be part of our process. This is Tim Johnson. As always, thank you for watching.
Hello, I'm Vermont Secretary of State Sarah Copeland Hanzas. Our office puts a great deal of work into ensuring that our local, state, and federal elections in Vermont are secure. I'm here with some of Vermont's city and town clerks to explain what that work entails. How do we know that elections in Vermont are secure?
First, we make sure our voter registration rolls are up to date with accurate information
for each of Vermont's 497,520 registered voters.
Every day, some voters move, others die,
and it's crucial that we can make sure our voter records reflect who is eligible to vote and where they're voting.
Vermont is part of the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, which uses encrypted public records data to let our office know if a Vermont voter has moved to a different part of the state or out of state. We're also able to get notified of duplicate registrations and voters who've died, so we can clear up our records.
While they do that at the state level, we clerks work with elected members of the Board of Civil Authority to go through our rolls with a fine-toothed comb.
The board is typically made up of members from multiple political parties. We use the Vermont Election Management System to make sure we have accurate information for all active voters in our jurisdiction. We can see if anyone registering in our town is already registered somewhere else in Vermont, and our election management system automatically picks out any duplicate records, which ensures that there is only one registration record per voter.
This all boils down to making sure that every eligible voter in Vermont is able to cast their vote on Election Day. For every vote cast in a statewide election in Vermont, we have a paper ballot, and we are able to keep meticulous track of who voted, when, where, and how. More on that in a minute.
This means that, for example, if somebody voted by mail and then they tried to vote a second time in person, they wouldn't be able to. One person, one vote.
Speaking of voting by mail, how do we know mail-in ballots are secure? This is why we put so much effort into our voter rolls. To vote by mail, you must be registered and verified with the state. One person, one vote. Every absentee ballot is tracked. If someone wanted to use another person's ballot to vote by mail, they would have to find someone who's registered to vote, voter impersonation, which is a 1 year in prison or up to $200 fine, and steal their ballot. Mail fraud and mail theft, 5 years in prison, and then they would have to forge a signature on the ballot envelope. Perjury, up to 15 years in prison and up to a $10,000 fine.
If someone tried that, they would then have to just hope that the person whose ballot they stole doesn't ask us about their missing ballot or show up to vote on Election Day, which would trigger an investigation.
Or that my election workers or I don't get suspicious, which would also trigger an investigation.
That this action can't be traced back to them. It can.
If they somehow got through all of that, they would have affected a single vote. It's worth mentioning that whenever absentee or early ballots are being handled, 2 election officials are required to be present. This is a highly scrutinized process by design. To mess with mail-in ballots on a mass scale would be virtually impossible, and the penalty for the crime would be significant. So what if instead of altering ballots themselves, someone wanted to affect the counting of votes in Vermont?
Vermont is a decentralized voting state. The infrastructure for vote counting is managed at the local level. Anytime votes are being counted, it's performed by pairs of sworn election officials from different political parties who must work together and agree on their count.
Results are then reported up to the state level through the secure election management system and made available to the public online in real time through our election night reporting site.
This means there's no one place of origin where someone could illegally impact the vote counts, and the tallying process is both closely and publicly watched.
Vermont law mandates that any town with 1,000 or more registered voters must use vote counting machines, since they're not only more efficient, but crucially, consistently more accurate than hand counting.
Today, 54% of Vermont's towns and 80% of our voters have their votes tallied in vote counting machines known as tabulators. Tabulators use optical scanners to count voter-marked paper ballots.
Each machine is air-gapped, meaning it has no connection, physical or wireless, to any other system or networks. No internet, nothing. They're sealed into themselves. Lonely for them, I guess, but good for our election security.
We don't wait until the day of for something to go wrong. 10 days before an election, we test the machines to make sure they're reading ballots correctly.
Before, during, and after an election, each machine's memory card is controlled through a strict chain of custody from the clerk's office to our office. If someone wanted to mess with a vote counting machine's results, they would have to physically tamper with each individual machine. In that event, they would still have only affected one town or one voting ward. So the idea that someone would or could Mission Impossible their way through this many Vermont towns is highly unlikely. It would take the entire Ocean's 11 crew riding in Santa's sleigh to pull off that level of a heist in one night.
So Election Day has come and gone. Do we just kick back and relax? No. Following Election Day, we have 48 hours to get our official results to the Secretary of State's office.
This is a chance for us to confirm, double-check, review write-ins, and make sure no mistakes were made during the late night hours on election night.
A lot of focus and energy goes into making sure everything runs smoothly at the polling place, so this is a chance to really concentrate on the data itself.
A good night's sleep, a coffee, and a fresh set of eyes goes a long way towards making sure everything is completely accurate when it's sent out.
Then, 30 days after every general election, my office conducts a post-election audit. We gather in December in a public live-streamed event where we select a random group of cities and towns, some of which are hand count towns, to confirm the results reported match the ballots. The results reported by the clerk are matched to the ballots themselves to make sure there are no discrepancies.
Even after that, Vermont law requires that ballots be kept for 22 months after statewide elections. That way, if there are concerns about the results that have been generated from the polling place, the Secretary of State's office can get back and check the ballots themselves.
We retain a copy of each ballot cast so that we can make sure the ballots themselves always match the reported results.
I hope this video helps to explain the many ways in which we ensure that Vermont's elections are secure. Secure elections are a critical part of the foundation for a healthy democracy. The other major part of that foundation is voter enfranchisement and participation. I strongly encourage all Vermonters to make sure their voice is heard on Election Day.
If you ever have questions about how to vote,
or where to vote,
or when to vote,
you can contact one of us, your Vermont town and city clerks.